Okay, so there are different categories of, so there are categories upon category, subcategories, and other subcategories of connective tissues. The classic connective tissues that share common features are called connective tissue proper. So they have a solid ground or solid fiber, they have a ground substance, and they have a matrix. So loose connective tissue, this category can also be broken down into subcategories called loose and dense connective tissue. I know, so loose meaning like, yeah, in the opposite of dense in this one. Now, supportive connective tissue is another broad category of connective tissue, but there are two main types. So cartilage, and cartilage is covered more in chapter 4 of both textbooks, but I think I tend to just go over the very basics and at this point, especially as it relates to the homework. But I will try to cover cartilage more in depth when we cover in the next exam unit when we talk about the bones, because cartilage and bone work hand in hand. And bone, so bone is a connective tissue. So, but again, is it the bone, or is the tissue in bone going to be the same as white adipose tissue or white fat? Is it going to be the same as other type of connective tissues in your skin? Not necessarily. There's this very special exception called fluid connective tissue. So fluid connective tissue includes blood. So blood is a connective tissue, and so is lymph. So we didn't cover what exactly lymph is, and we do cover that more in detail next semester. But these are special fluids in your body that are important to carry in carrying cells. And they also have protein components. They're not just pure water surrounding these cells. They actually have a lot of proteins, and they have also other solutes as well that are important for the function of these tissues and also your body as well. Okay, so what are connective tissue proper? Well, they involve some sort of cells and some sort of matrix. So what are the cells? Well, the major component of connective tissue is pretty much almost every single organ and connective tissue in your body. If you took it and ground it up and purified all the cells, you would definitely find fibroblasts. These are the most common type of cells in your body. There are also fibrocytes, adipocytes, mesenchymal cells, and these over here. So over here, these are all immune cells, and we cover the immune system more in depth next semester. And melanocytes we'll cover in the next chapter, so I'm going to punt that down the road for now. So let's talk about those other cells in this left column over here. So here's a picture from your OpenStax book, and what we see is that we have all these cells, like the adipocytes, the mesenchymal cells, the macrophages, the fibroblasts, but you have all these protein fibers surrounding like the reticular fibers, the collagen fibers over here, and elastic fibers. So you notice that there's fibers surrounding these cells, and this yellow stuff, is it just space? No, this is some sort of ground substance. It's something that fills in the gaps. So that's a common misconception when you're looking at these slides and figures. When you're first looking at connective tissue, is that everything between the cells and these fibers is just air or water. It's actually that ground substance, and what ground substance is it? It depends on the specific type of connective tissue you're looking at. And this is the Martini version. So the thing is that when you're looking at this, it's more, you're not going to take a slice of any tissue and see all of these cells in every single type of connective tissue. This is kind of just showing you an overview of the possible types of connective tissue cells you can encounter in connective tissue proper. So I like to draw an analogy between this and when you see these type of images. So when you see these, I know, birds again, when you see this, are you going to take a photo at random and get all of these native Hawaiian birds in one photo? If you're really lucky, submit it to National Geographic. But this is more of an infographic showing you all the possible birds you can find or native birds you can find endemic to Hawaii. But same with this picture over here. You're not going to find all of these cells in all connective tissues. It's just showing you what types of cells and how they kind of look in general, but you're not going to take a slice of a connective tissue and get something that looks like this. Okay, so connective tissue, what's the point of this? Well, notice that all these cells look very different from each other, and not only do they look different, they also have very diverse functions as well. So the thing about connective tissues is that they're not just there just to fill in the gaps between epithelia, nervous, and muscle tissue. They're not, well, there are some that do that, but connective tissue, each different type of connective tissue has a specialized function. And again, what are those functions? We're trying to keep it, like, I'll cover it as we go along during this year. Okay, so let's talk about this fibroblasts and fibrocytes. So they both start with fibro, and what did we just talk about a few minutes ago? We talked about protein fibers, and this is a major function of these types of cells. So fibroblasts, if you kind of looked at them under a microscope, you would see that they kind of look like this. And what they are, they're actually the most common type of cell in your connective tissues. So if you took any sort of connective tissue and then separated all the cells and categorized them, the vast majority of them would be, or at least the plurality would be, fibroblasts. But what they do is secrete all types of fibers. So it's not coincidental they're called fibroblasts, because they secrete things like collagen, reticular fibers, and elastic fibers. And the great thing about them is that they're able to easily regenerate, divide, so they can actually generate a lot of these protein fibers and generate a lot of matrix to kind of help form some structures that help to hold organs and tissues together. And what eventually happens during their life cycle is that they can also develop into mature fibroblasts. So the thing is that fibroblasts and fibrocytes, they're related, but they're at different stages of life. Now, this is something you often see in different types of cells. Like, there are many types of cells and many types of, but whenever you see a cell that ends with blast or a cell that ends with site, typically if there's like, okay, if they start with the same thing, if there's a blast, there's probably a site. So blast, it would be a immature. So it's kind of like immature, maybe like a young teenager or young adult version of a cell. Very active, still able to replicate and reproduce. But site is when it starts to mature and then starts to slow down. It's not so much about building new stuff and doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's more about maintenance. So this is what, if a cell has a site form, it has and a blast form. The blast is the immature form or the younger form, and the site is the more mature form. So what we have here, so here we have something called myoblast. So actually that's another useful preview for next unit. Myo refers to muscle. So this is like an immature muscle cell, but what can eventually happen when they fuse together is they can form something called a myocyte. So that's what we have with that, and we'll cover what differentiate is in a bit. Then there's things called osteoblasts. These are immature bone cells, and they can develop into these cells called osteocytes. Now chondroblasts, well, these are immature cartilage cells. They can form chondrocytes. And then lymphoblasts, these can mature into lymphocytes. Now fibroblasts, what do you think the mature form is? Let's go to top hat. Okay, so hopefully, so what should we call a mature fibroblast? And this is the fill in the blank, so you have to type in something. Most of you said fibrocyte, and yeah, I'll accept fibrocytes as well, but yes. So again, if there's a blast form, that's the younger form, that's immature, and the mature form is a something site. So in this case, a mature fibroblast is a fibrocyte. Great, great, great. Okay, so let's go back to talking about our cells. Alright, so fibrocyte. And what are the difference? Well, they both make fibers, but again, fibroblasts and fibrocytes, they're actually both pretty darn common. So fibroblasts are the most abundant, and they're also rapidly dividing. And fibrocytes, they're number 2, because again, you have a lot of fibroblasts, therefore, when they mature, they're going to become a lot of fibrocytes as well. Now, the thing is that you find these in all connective tissue proper. So this is another reason why a type of tissue might be considered connective tissue proper. If it doesn't have fibroblasts and fibrocytes, it's not a connective tissue proper. And what do they do? Well, the thing is that fibroblasts, these are the ones that make new proteins and fibers of the extracellular matrix. So collagen, elastin, reticular fibers, and also things like special proteins like hyaluronan. So again, but the thing about fibroblasts, because they're making a lot of these proteins, they're also very active, and they're kind of young, and they're kind of new to the job, so they're very go get them, and let's make a lot of proteins as much as we can. But as they spend more days on the job, what happens to them is that they slow down, and then instead of becoming very active in making new proteins, they become a little more limited in that. So they're more about maintaining the protein fibers and surrounding tissues than they are about secreting and building new protein fiber networks.